Welcome to the Careers in Music podcast. My name is Caleb J. Murphy. In this episode, we talk to full-time film composer Phil Servati. He's written music for brands like Genesis, Titleist, Pearl Vision, Verizon, Colgate, Kraft, Nikon, and ExxonMobil. His scores have also been featured in films like Chasing Faster, For the Team, and Marriage Retreat, and he's also scored music for short films. In this conversation, we talk about how you can get into film composing, how you can start writing a melody, and the effect of AI on film composers today. Let's get into it. I guess starting at the beginning, for someone who wants to get into composing music but has never before, what's like the first step that they should take?
With how much technology has advanced today as opposed to when I had gotten started, there were some things out back then, but I think I would just start experimenting right away with, whether that's recording, voice memos, playing guitar and singing, or piano, or whatever your instrument is. Just start doing something. And what I find most often with myself, even having been composing for a number of years now, is just getting the process started and experimenting and approaching it that way. I have a ton of training with music theory, and I have an undergraduate degree. I have a master's degree, both in composition and scoring for film, and those degrees were super helpful to me, not in terms of landing work, but in terms of developing myself as a musician and a composer. But I almost never approach composing from the standpoint of music theory. I always kind of start, at the most basic level with, either a pen and paper or literally my phone at my piano, recording a voice memo, just experimenting, some improvising, trying to get kind of a sonic environment started that points me, in the right direction, and then kind of going from there. So
yeah, no, that was my next question, was like how you normally start composing a piece of music.
Yeah.
And I guess I know it can happen many different ways, but what's the most common way you find yourself starting a piece of music?
Yeah, well, a lot of the music that I write is geared towards accompanying a film or a video. So a lot of times that kind of dictates the direction and the tone and the feel of the piece. So for me, that's really helpful, because there's already kind of a timeline, an arc of the story visually, and so forth. But if there's not, that's almost even more difficult, as a composer, for myself. So what I like to do is kind of just start to get an idea of, getting maybe a few descriptive terms or emotions or feelings together that I might want a piece of music to represent, and then going from there.
That is kind of how I do it, but I'm not trained in music theory.
Yeah.
And so I'm just humming stuff, and then I'm hey, cellist friend, can you play what I hummed?
Yeah, I honestly think music theory is a very great thing. You can learn so much, you can go so deep into it, but I've always kind of looked at music theory as a way of analyzing existing music. That's kind of just the way that the schooling that I went through. We had all these theory books, and it was great in terms of learning how the classical era or Baroque era of music, the masters like Bach and Beethoven and Mozart, how they did things and analyzing how they did things. But I haven't talked to those guys, but I'm not sure that they approached composing music based off of, those rules or analytical approaches. So I'm not trying to throw down music theory at all. I just don't think I think it's something that really can enable someone to write music and understand what they're writing. But I think for me, I usually get started most of the time by a sound, a melody, a rhythm, a chord progression, so something that's based off of my ears or that I feel versus music theory, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Oh no, that's interesting. So it's almost like music theory is an educational thing, and then you kind of take what you learn and.
Yeah, and I think there's really amazing components of it, and it's super helpful. Like if you understand, the ins and outs of music and theory, it can definitely enable you to do different things than you might do just solely relying on your ear. But that isn't. I don't think I start the compositional process with music theory. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense.
I do use theory, but it probably just comes out naturally.
Right, because
So.
No, yeah, I get that. Yeah, you learned. It's a thing you learned, and it became a part of your repertoire. And
yeah, like part of your vocabulary.
Right.
Honestly, if I go back to it now, there's things that I can pull out of it that would probably just keep helping me advance. Like one of the things I feel like, counterpoint is something that's an area where, I could brush up on. And I took a course in counterpoint in college, and it was like at 8 a.m. with a professor who was great, but I was just a little tired at that point.
Yeah. I don't even know what you mean by that, because I am not trained in music theory.
Yeah, so counterpoint is really Bach was the master of counterpoint. So it's basically you have to really kind of boil it down, say you have your melody, and then you kind of have a second melody, and they kind of complement. The second line kind of complements the main line, and that's counterpoint, is how those two melodic lines interact together.
And they're usually on different instruments, right?
They can be, yeah. They can be It can also be, on the piano. It can be 4-part lines, with Bach's fugues and inventions and things of that sort. So, but it could also be a string quartet. So
yeah. You just said you went to school, and I'm wondering nowadays if you think that would be worth it for aspiring composers.
I really think it depends where you're at. I mean, it was something that I needed and that I approached as an opportunity to learn from each individual professor. My piano instructor, I'm thinking in undergrad, was so instrumental in my development as a musician at age 18. My composition teacher there as well. They were so focused on not necessarily their own, performance or composing or conducting careers, even though they did have those careers. They were really focused on their teaching and their students, and it was just such an amazing environment for me and my other, students at the time that helped me develop. And so forth, I went to grad school as well, and kind of just honed in grad school on scoring for film and multimedia, and those programs were essential for me. Like I said, it's not going to land me a job unless maybe I'm applying for a job at a college, but it's not going to land me a job scoring a film or writing music for a commercial or working with another musical artist. So I think for me, it was essential to help me develop as a musician. But if that's not something that you need, I'm thinking of all the people that are, just so gifted musically, play by ear, oftentimes don't know how to write in terms of notate music, but they're playing, they're improvising. They're some of the best players, and they're amazing. And I would, for those folks, I would just say, don't go to school. Don't mess up, what you already have going for yourself. Just keep going. So I think it just depends where you're coming from, what you need, if you really need to develop or want to develop, try and go after finding schools that have professors that speak to you and the styles that you're interested in.
Mm-hmm. You do this full time, yes?
Yeah.
Okay. So what's a typical day look like for you?
So a typical day looks like for me when I'm on a project.
Yes.
Because it just depends, and it depends on what the project is. So I would say it's different depending on the project.
Yeah.
So if it's, if I'm scoring for film, that is just, and if you can also break it down to, well, is it a short film or is it a feature film? Mm-hmm. And the workloads are just drastically different. Mm-hmm. So feature film is just, an incredible amount of music. It could be, 60 or 90 minutes of music, depending on if it's wall-to-wall music or not. And that's a much longer, commitment, and you're writing just all the time.
Yeah.
You wake up, I have my coffee, and you get to it. And the deadlines, it just depends what the deadline is, whether you have to literally work morning to night or not. But typically with films and feature-length films, it's a pretty intense schedule. Short films, obviously they can be, 3 to 12 minutes or in that area. And it's a much smaller commitment in terms of, maybe it's a few weeks or a month. But with commercial projects and writing music for ads, it's usually, it's funny because I used to get pretty stressed out about 10 years ago when I would land one of these ad projects, because they always, the ad companies, they always want something yesterday. And so you are literally just writing as fast as you can. But the thing is that once you get together in the first draft and you send it to them, it's crickets until you hear back from the client. And so you're just, it's like pedal to the metal, and all of a sudden you just slam on the brakes and you don't really do much until you hear feedback from the client. And so it just, those are, the film and the advertising world are obviously very different, and there's pros and cons to both, but I really enjoy both of them.
Yeah.
So.
Hey, just going to interrupt real quick to say that if you want to learn how to start your career in the music industry with guidance from experts who are doing what you want to do, make sure you check out careersinmusic.com. Okay, back to the conversation. So how do you balance meeting deadlines and still making something you're proud of?
Yeah, that's a good question. Can I back up a little bit in terms of the process and kind of loop that into it a little bit?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think my process is pretty similar, whether it's working on a film or a commercial. And what I typically do is I'll start composing and sketching a handful of ideas. And usually I don't, share with the client the first ideas. You want to kind of go through and weed out some of the junk until you start, getting to some of the better ideas. Mm-hmm. And then what I'll do is I'll take, usually 3 of those sketches, and I'll develop them a little bit. Mm. So I'll add, if I'm sketching at the piano, and I'm kind of a little old school in the sense that I still sketch with pencil and paper. But I will be at the piano usually. And
when you say sketch, do you mean you're writing music, like notating music?
Yeah. So I'll notate music with pencil and paper at the piano, and it can be kind of just shorthand that I understand. It can be a melody with chord changes, or it can be a rhythm, or usually it's something melodic, or if it's strings, I'll have some sort of context that I'm sketching, but it's not fully realized and not fully orchestrated in that little sketch. It kind of just gives me a direction.
Okay.
And then I'll develop, like I said, about 3 of those sketches. And so I'll go to, my computer, I'll open up Pro Tools, I'll get together, maybe 3 to 5 instruments, software instruments, and start kind of just building out those sketches to give the client or the film director an idea of where I'm going. Mm-hmm. Because a lot of times if I just send them a sketch on the piano and tell them, hey, this is a piano sketch, you're going to hear the melody and the harmonies of where I'm thinking it's going to go, but I want you to imagine, it's going to be for full orchestra. Mm. A lot of times it's pretty difficult for them to do unless, they're really into that and familiar with the orchestral type of sounds and music and whatnot. But I think nowadays you really want to give whoever you're working for the best idea of where you're going. So I'll do that, and then they'll usually say, oh, we like elements of 1 and we like elements of number 3, but you can scrap number 2. And usually they'll want you to combine, it almost happens every time where the client will want me to combine, 2 of the sketches into 1. And then at that point, I'll fully develop that, sketch and fully orchestrate it with all the instruments. And then there's a period of, feedback and revisions until you get it to where the client likes it. Yeah. So that's kind of how I approach the composing process for those types of projects.
Yeah. So how do you even come up with a melody?
My composition teacher in undergrad always, said that anyone who can whistle can compose. Mm. And so I really believe that too. Just, I think, if you're able to whistle a little tune, a little melody, or sing a short phrase, and I think anyone can get started composing that way. And so that could be one way, but I think with getting started, the thing that's most helpful for me is to listen to music that's in the genre that I'm going to be composing in. Mm. And not so much for the sake of copying or ripping off ideas, because obviously you don't want to do that. Mm-hmm. But I really feel like listening to music is like putting fuel in your car. Like you have to have gas to drive your car. And for me, listening to music and to new music and to getting inspired, that is really helpful to me. It kind of just starts putting musical ideas in my ears. And then that's really kind of what I use as a jumping off point to get my own ideas flowing. So I'm curious as to what, can we turn this around? Sure. I'm curious as to what you would say too, but I know, you're interviewing me. So that's just one way that I like to get started. So
yeah, no, I like that. If you can whistle, you can compose. And that is kind of how it, like for me, that's how it is work. That's how it works, is just kind of like singing whatever. Like for me, it's gibberish lyrics until I find a melody.
Yeah. That's cool. I like that. I can see you doing that. Yeah. Sometimes too, I'll go onto Spotify and I'll put together a playlist of music that is similar to what I'm trying to go for. Mm. And that's usually pretty helpful to me, but I don't want to keep listening to that over and over again, because then that music kind of starts to be emulated. I'm emulating that music now, and I need to write something original. So like I said, I'll use that kind of as a jumping off point. but I won't listen to that playlist for too long.
Yeah. No, they're kind of like, they're almost like reference tracks in a
Yeah,
way.
yeah.
Yeah.
And for me too, that's a lot of times I get that from clients where they'll share a film with, temp music where they've already put down existing music, and they use it kind of as a jumping off point to start from, or with ad projects too. It's, they'll put together a playlist and say, these are some inspirational tracks. And then I'll kind of have to say, well, I can't do that legally, but I can do something with that flavor, and then, come up with something original.
Yeah.
So,
No, yeah. So I'm recording an album now, and like I found like a song that already exists that I want each of my tracks to sound like.
yeah.
To inspiration from. And it's cool because I'm like, I already wrote the song, so naturally they sort of sound like these other artists. I'm just kind of directing them that way.
Yeah, that's cool. It's good too for mixing, obviously. You
Yeah.
can do A/B comparisons and try and get it to sound as produced as those mainstream tracks.
And you're doing everything too. You mix and master your music, right?
I do, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Are there any like what are your favorite plugins or virtual instruments for like composing music?
This is always the best part. I've primarily been drawn to Cinesamples over the years. Cinesamples, it's CINE and then samples. And I feel like they've, especially for orchestral instruments, they have been really great. And there's a number out there. I mean, in terms of orchestral instruments, libraries, I really like how natural and organic and realistic their samples are. No sample library is perfect, but I feel like, especially for the price point, they've done a really great job. There's a number of other ones out there, but that's typically, where I'll start in terms of my strings, and the percussion library is huge. And so that's, in terms of orchestral sounds, they've been a great resource for me. And then a lot of times, for clients like Titleist and stuff, they're really trying to push the envelope in terms of, being modern. And so we'll implement, neat sounding synths. And for that, I've just found that, there's libraries out there like Omnisphere, which is really great for like those atmospheric synths and for a number of other things in sound design. But for those really like edgy or warm or, just you have to use analog synthesizers. And so I've really been a fan of, Moog synthesizers, and I have one of their synths right now, and I'm hoping to just keep building that collection.
Yeah.
But they're very expensive.
Yeah, I bet. Well, because they're probably vintage too, right?
Yeah, you can, I mean, if the vintage ones are just crazy. Like, I mean, they can be tens of thousands of dollars. And they're putting out new stuff too. There's a new synth called the Moog Muse that just came out, and it's still expensive. I think it's maybe about $4,000 or $5,000. So it's pricey.
Yeah.
But it's not in the tens of thousands. And they just, in terms of the warmth and the fullness of analog synths, I still haven't really come across a software instrument that can really duplicate that. It's not to say that there's one out there that I haven't heard.
Yeah.
But I just kind of prefer, the real deal. Same thing with pianos. I'm a pianist, and that's always where I start composing, is at the piano. And I prefer the natural, acoustic instrument. The only thing is that it takes me a lot longer, to record that way versus being able to just go in. And Cinesamples also has a great software instrument piano called Cine Piano. It's a wonderful software instrument, and a lot of my piano music starts there and or finishes there, but I'll typically try and go and record, my real acoustic piano.
Yeah, there's nothing like a real live piano, I think.
Yeah, for sure.
I wanted to ask you about your thoughts on AI and how that could affect composers, or how maybe it already has affected composers.
Yeah, hot topic.
Yeah.
And I might not be the best one to speak to AI on music yet. I'm not really leveraging it for any of my work at the moment, but I'm sure there's things that you can do that would probably speed up the composing process. And
does it worry you at all, or are you excited about it, or like how are you feeling about AI?
yeah, I'm not too worried about it at the moment. I'm not concerned about it. I mean, I think it's a question mark at this point. And I've read some articles about just some of the music that people have been creating using AI, and just specifically the AI generated music that's ripping off. I think there was an article about a track that was released with The Weeknd's voice, and it wasn't actually his music. It wasn't something he released.
Yeah,
and just there's so much, I think, with AI and with streaming royalties still. Not to change the topic, but there's so much in this online world, and that is still being worked out in terms of copyright and the legalities and all that sort. But I think a lot of people were concerned probably about synthesizers taking over like orchestras and replacing orchestras, in the 70s and 80s. And I don't think that's really happened. I think, so each time we advance with this new, technical idea or technology, I think there's ways to use it to advance, what we do, and to hopefully, streamline some of the things that are, just kind of paperwork type things where it just takes up time. But, if you can use and leverage AI to speed up the compositional process, I think that's probably a good thing.
Yeah. Okay, we're about to run out of time, but thanks for doing this, man.
Yeah, thanks so much, Caleb. It's good to connect with you, and let's stay in touch.
Yeah, we'll keep in touch.
Cool. All right, take care.
All right, take care.